Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. The frost was gaining strength, the snow sang underfoot. From the high sky, large radiant stars looked down on the earth. George was hurrying home. His face burned from the frost, the cold bit into his body, even through his thick quilted jacket. Only his feet in large felt boots were warm. The man was returning from a friend's place. He and Peter had known each other since childhood. Their paths had diverged and converged again many times, but Peter had always been a support in difficult times, offering a shoulder, sharing the last of what he had. Most often in silence, because words came hard to him. And in most cases, they weren't needed anyway. Peter was one of those people who kept George from leaving his native Alexandrovka. Although his grown children, long and firmly settled in the city, often invited their father to live with them. Well, think how much easier your lot would be, his daughter Sarah persuaded. All the benefits of city life in an apartment, not burdened with worries about the land. Your means allow it, enough for utilities and for leisure activities you enjoy. You'll go to the cinema, to the theater. But how can I leave my ancestral home? George stubbornly resisted. And what about the house? His son James chimed in. What about the house? Dilapidated, settled. The roof needs fixing, then the fence leans, then something else. How much trouble it requires. But in an apartment, beauty, you'll live like a king. A cage of stone, George stubbornly insisted. Well, what would I do there? You're constantly busy with work, and I'd be stuck alone for days on end like an owl. We could visit you more often, Sarah offered her arguments. As it is, you live 150 kilometers from the city. The road to you isn't short. George only sighed and shook his head negatively. No, he wasn't going anywhere from Alexandrovka. It was hard to explain to the children. They were so modern, so practical. There was sense in their words, of course, but how could he part with the house that had become a part of himself? He remembered how his grandfather and father had built it with the help of friends and relatives. Everyone helped because the day before, their previous home had turned to ash. Lightning had struck the roof. The log house turned out neat, sturdy, smelling of resin and fresh wood. And then, many years later, when young George decided to marry after the army, his grandfather handed the property over to his only grandson, and he himself moved in with his son. George still remembered his grandfather's words. A man must bring his wife under his own roof. A wife must feel secure with her husband, as if behind a stone wall. Then you will have happiness. And George put in all his effort, tried very hard so that Ellen would find peace and confidence beside him and wouldn't think about problems, only enjoy the quiet happiness of family life. Ellen. He had met her in childhood. The girl seemed sweet to him, with eyes as deep and blue as the summer sky, with two thin braids like wheat stalks. Her skin was touched by the sun. She wore a light pink sundress and dusty worn sandals. And under her arm, a weighty book. That was exactly how George first saw his future wife. Only then, of course, he didn't even dream that he was seeing his destiny. George himself was no more than 10 or 11 years old then. He, Peter, and a few other village boys were just making their way to the pond. A fishing rod rested on his shoulder, a light bucket in his hands, trousers rolled up to his knees, a misshapen t-shirt. A whole summer lay ahead. Holidays had just begun. Friends were nearby. George's mood was light, almost weightless, joyful. And then, there she was. She stood by the dilapidated fence near Grandma Annie's house and watched a cat with a litter of kittens with tender thoughtfulness. A stranger. George had never seen this girl in Alexandrovka before, and something about her immediately attracted his attention. Something made him freeze to look closer at the slender figure. The other boys didn't notice anything unusual. They walked past as before. But George, he already understood then that the strange girl was not just a chance encounter on his path. Hey, what's up? Peter turned back to his friend. Why are you frozen in the middle of the road? Let's go. At that moment, the girl raised her huge blue eyes to him. It was as if a current ran through him from head to toe. The boy, surprised at himself, flushed, his face covered in a blush. "Coming, coming," he shouted to Peter, and he hurried to catch up with his friends. Later, he learned that the girl's name was Ellen, and that she would now live with Grandma Annie because something terrible had happened and her parents were gone. Rumors multiplied. Some boys claimed that her parents had abandoned their daughter and run away. Others spoke of a terrible tragedy. Still others told stories about how Ellen's parents had gotten lost in the dense forest. Later, it turned out that their lives were cut short in a car accident. They were hitchhiking to the city. The driver lost control on a treacherous, slippery road, and so Ellen was sent to live in the neighboring village with the only relative she had left, Grandma Annie. Learning what had happened to the girl, George felt pity for her. It was frightening even to imagine. How could it be, just like that in an instant, to lose both mother and father? After the boy was told about Ellen's fate, he wanted to become her protector, to guard her and bring her joy. Only the boy didn't know how to approach her. Seeing her from afar, his heart rejoiced at the meeting, but his cheeks were covered in a blush of embarrassment. And besides, George had never known how to talk to girls. They seemed to him harmful and arrogant creatures. But Ellen was completely different. The boy felt it. Ellen spoke to him herself. This happened at the end of summer. George had climbed a tree then to rescue the hapless puffball. The little neighbor's kitten was always finding adventures for his furry skin, and this time, frightened by dogs, he had shot up to the top of a tall oak and couldn't get down. He sat there, right at the very top, and wailed desperately in a thin voice for the whole street to hear. Could anyone just walk by? George, of course, climbed up to help. The rough bark scraped his chest and stomach, but he saved the little creature. "You climb trees skillfully," the boy heard a quiet voice behind him. He turned and met the approving gaze of her huge blue eyes. It was her, Ellen. "It's nothing special." Embarrassment again enveloped the boy. "How cute." Ellen's gaze fell on Puffball. "Can I hold him?" "Of course." George handed her the kitten. She began to gently stroke his gray fur, calling him the tenderest names. And somehow, without noticing it, they started talking. George no longer remembered what about. It seemed they first talked about cats, then switched to dogs. After that, Ellen told him about her life with her parents there, in the distant large village. She missed her mother and father, and also her old friends, her school. Her voice sounded wistful, her eyes were full of sadness. George immediately promised to introduce her to the boys and girls in Alexandrovka. He assured her that the people here were kind and cheerful too. Anything to wipe away that sadness. Anything to see her smile. And George kept his promise. Very soon, the girl became one of their cheerful, noisy company. She went with the kids to the river and the forest, played football, Cossacks and robbers, sat by the evening bonfire on the outskirts. Ellen turned out to be a quiet but deep girl, and also smart, curious. How much she knew, how much she noticed. George openly admired this beautiful girl. Then, at 10 years old, he didn't yet understand what was happening in his soul. He couldn't even imagine that it was love. Love for a lifetime. Summer flew by unnoticed. The school year began. Ellen became George and Peter's classmate. Years passed. School friendship imperceptibly grew into a deep mutual feeling. George enrolled in a technical school after the 9th grade, learning the profession of a mechanic. Ellen, an excellent student by nature, became a student at a medical college. George and Ellen were already openly dating then, going on dates like adults, going to the city for walks, sharing their first kisses. This surprised no one. The couple formed so naturally as if it couldn't have been otherwise. And then George went into the army, and Ellen waited for him for 2 long years. She wrote him letters, came to visit her beloved several times. In the army, George finally matured. Upon returning, he didn't delay and proposed to Ellen. She, of course, gladly accepted. That's when his grandfather handed over the house to the young couple, the house where George was now meeting his old age, alas, alone. How much he missed Ellen. Every day, every moment. Sometimes it seemed she would come out of the kitchen any minute, rosy-cheeked with a smile, smelling of fresh baking, and ask, "How are you?" But this was not destined to happen. They lived, as they say, soul to soul. They cherished each other. They were good and peaceful together. George sometimes felt that he understood his wife without words. She understood him. They didn't delay having children. A year after the wedding, they were already rocking the cradle of their firstborn, James. A couple of years later, a daughter appeared in the family, the charming, giggling Sarah, incredibly like her mother. George worked on the local collective farm, earned a decent living, enough to get by. Ellen worked part-time as a nurse in the village clinic. The children brought joy to their parents. Both studied well, helped with household chores, and obeyed their parents in everything. Only one shadow darkened their happiness. During Ellen's second pregnancy, when the happy couple was expecting Sarah, a heart defect was discovered. Whether it was congenital or acquired was hard to say. The ailment had not made itself known before, but the birth of two children in quick succession exacerbated the course of the disease. After the daughter's birth, Ellen began to be bothered by attacks. She would suddenly turn pale, her lips would turn blue, she would clutch her heart. At such moments, George's heart would be squeezed by icy fear. He could protect his beloved from any misfortune, from a rabid dog, from an evil person, from the elements, but not from a treacherous disease. George and Ellen dreamed of a large family. They didn't plan to stop at 2, but the doctors delivered their verdict. It was dangerous to her life to have more children. Ellen constantly took medication, periodically went to the hospital. George gradually got used to this, got used to the idea that the illness was under control, and almost stopped fearing for his beloved. The children grew up. First, the son left to study in the city. He entered the economics faculty of a prestigious university. On his own, without connections, without money. George and Ellen were incredibly proud of their son. But they were also worried. How would he manage alone in the big city without them? What if he dropped out, fell into bad company? But James didn't let them down. He studied excellently and also worked part-time. 2 years later, his sister Sarah followed in her brother's footsteps. She also went to the city. And George and Ellen were left alone in their house. Yes, it was a golden period in their lives. George remembered it with warm nostalgia. The children had grown up, were living their own lives, visiting occasionally, bringing a heap of news and impressions. Everything was going well for their son and daughter, even excellently. Both their careers were going uphill, and their personal lives were settling down. They were proud of their children and rejoiced in their successes. And they also enjoyed a calm, measured life and waited for grandchildren. They went mushroom picking, fishing, celebrated holidays with Peter and Jane. It was good. Then the grandchildren appeared. First, a daughter was born to their son, then a son to their daughter. A new era began in their family life. In the summer, the little ones were brought to their grandparents, and they happily spent time with their grandchildren. They no longer needed to work. The happy grandparents could devote all their time and attention to these wonderful little creatures. Returning from the forest or fishing with the little ones, George would catch the aromas of delicious baking while still in the yard. Ellen was trying her best for her loved ones while they were out. More than once he thought, "This is happiness," and he thanked fate for this gift, for Ellen, for the children, for the grandchildren. The grandchildren grew up, started visiting Alexandrovka less often. Which was understandable. They had their own affairs, their own friends. Yesterday's little ones turned into teenagers. Sarah and James also didn't spoil their parents with frequent visits. When would they have the time? Work, home, children. George and Ellen, of course, missed their family, but they understood them perfectly. Life in the city was like that. The pace was frantic. When George and Ellen visited their children, they would get tired of this rhythm in a couple of days and gladly return to their quiet, cozy Alexandrovka, to their beloved home. And then the illness finally revealed itself in full force. Ellen got worse. The expensive medicines that James got from somewhere abroad didn't help. The treatment at the best city center didn't save her. Ellen slowly faded, her strength leaving her with each passing day. George saw it, saw everything, understood, but he couldn't do anything, absolutely nothing. No, he could do something. He filled his wife's last days with light, warmth, and joy. Every morning he gave her bouquets of wildflowers and then armfuls of bright autumn leaves. He cooked Ellen's favorite dishes, talked with her for hours. They remembered the past, including their carefree, happy childhood. Ellen smiled, gently, affectionately. George tried to imprint this smile in his memory down to the smallest detail. One evening, Ellen felt unwell. George called an ambulance. His wife was taken to the city hospital. George held her hand until she was wheeled away to the ward. He never saw his wife alive again. The doctors did everything possible, but it didn't work. George grieved heavily over the loss. The world around him lost meaning. Colors faded, sounds became muffled, as if coming through a thickness of water. The children stayed with their inconsolable father for a while and then fluttered back into their own lives, which was perhaps for the best. Affairs and worries distract from grief, help to get through difficult days. Peter, his loyal friend, stayed with George. He came every day, sat beside him silently as always. The friend smoked on the porch, sometimes talking about the news or the weather. Peter's wife Jane also visited often, always bringing something tasty: pies, goulash, even dumplings. Everything George loved. He appreciated the care of his loved ones. He knew that they also missed Ellen. All four had known each other since childhood and had become almost like family over the years in Alexandrovka. Life gradually returned to its course. George somehow adapted to the new reality, learned to exist without Ellen. Although, why without Ellen? His wife was always beside him in his thoughts. He talked to her before bed, shared his sorrows and joys. Mentally, of course, these silent dialogues made his soul lighter, warmer. The children urged their lonely father to move to the city, closer to them. George and Ellen's savings would have been enough for a modest apartment. Life in the city, according to them, would be easier and more pleasant, and they, their children and grandchildren, would be nearby. They could see each other more often. But George couldn't leave his home, where every corner held memories of happy years, and the landscapes of Alexandrovka, and the forest that had become dear to him over the years, and his favorite spot by the river, where he went fishing and where he could think so well, and Peter and Jane. Finally, silent Peter, who had become his brother in spirit. No, the man could not leave Alexandrovka. This was his place. But how could he explain this to his children? They presented logical arguments that were hard to dispute. George had almost reached his gate. His house stood at the edge of the street. Beyond the fence lay the snow-covered highway, along which cars rarely passed now. Further on stretched a wide field, and behind it stood the forest like a wall, the very one where George loved to spend time. It was already late and cold. The frost seemed to be gaining strength. Tomorrow, perhaps, even school classes would be canceled. Wide columns of smoke rose from chimney pipes into the sky. Life was warm in these houses. Wives were preparing dinner. Children were bent over their homework. Cheerful, warm, bright, cozy. And George? Empty rooms awaited him. Warm ones, though. When he left to visit, he had heated the house well. It was quite bright, although there had never been streetlights on George's street. They were in the central part, but the light of the full moon that had rolled into the sky was more than enough. George habitually scanned the surroundings, and then he noticed her in the distance, a small, thin, hunched figure. Someone was trudging along the roadside slowly, barely moving their feet, either from exhaustion or perhaps injured or drunk. In any case, the person clearly needed help. It was dangerous to stay outside in such a frost. George hurried towards the lonely figure. For his age, he was in excellent shape, didn't complain about his strength, and could still run very fast. Daily walks in the fresh air and physical labor, no matter what you say, hardened him. This person was clearly not from Alexandrovka, was moving away from the village, trudging along the highway towards the city. Was she really planning to walk there in such a frost? George quickened his pace. The figure was getting closer. Now only a few dozen meters remained. George had become nearsighted in his old age, but from this distance he could already make out that a young girl was trudging along the road, sinking into the deep snow. She looked a little older than George's granddaughter, perhaps 20, maybe less. Thin, somehow frightened, in a long fashionable down jacket, clearly not suitable for the weather. in light boots with low heels, completely out of place outside the city. She was shivering, wrapped in a scarf wound several times around her neck. There were no gloves or mittens on her hands. Her thin fingers were completely numb. "Wait!" George called out to the stranger. The girl turned around. Pretty large brown eyes, a scattering of freckles on her upturned nose. Short chestnut curls peeked out from under her knitted hat. She flinched in surprise, clearly not expecting to meet anyone on the deserted road. Then fear appeared in her eyes. George understood. If she could, she would have rushed away immediately, run away. But the stranger was clearly at the end of her strength. She could barely move her legs. "Don't be afraid of me. I won't harm you." He tried to speak as gently as possible. "You need to get warm. The frost is getting stronger. The nearest village is 25 kilometers away. You'll freeze." The girl stopped. She understood that George was right, but it seemed she saw no other way out. The stranger looked completely desperate. "Did something happen?" George asked sympathetically. He knew that letting her go was equivalent to abandoning a person to certain death. "Yes," the stranger finally said. Her voice trembled. The girl was clearly holding back tears. Do you need help?" "Yes." The girl nodded again. It seemed she was afraid to say anything more, that she wouldn't be able to hold back the tears then. "That's good. Let's go to my place now. You need to warm up quickly. Your cheeks are completely frostbitten already. We'll think about how to help your trouble there." The girl hesitated, which was understandable. Going into the house of a stranger met at night on a deserted highway was a risky decision, but she had no other choice, and the stranger nodded briefly in agreement. "That's great. My house. It's very close. Look, there it is, standing by the road," he said in a calm, ordinary tone, trying to reassure the girl a little. The stranger walked slightly behind George, looking around nervously. Her body was tense. She was ready to run at the slightest sign of danger. In the yard, the old dog Buddy ran up to George, wagging his tail. The dog had served as a guardian of the house for almost 15 years. Loyal, smart, kind. He sniffed the guest and barked a friendly welcome, as if inviting her in. The girl smiled, stroked the dog's head, and the tension that had gripped her eased a little. George was pleased by this change. Maybe the stranger would finally talk and tell him what had happened to her. The story was clearly dark. That much was absolutely clear. It was warm in the house. George turned on the light, led the guest to the kitchen, seated her closer to the stove, which was still radiating heat. The girl needed to warm up. She had spent so much time in the cold. The stranger was clearly enjoying the warmth and coziness of the village house. She took off her hat and scarf, but she wasn't in a hurry to unbutton her coat. She hadn't warmed up yet. George put the kettle on. He talked incessantly about something so that an uncomfortable silence wouldn't hang in the air. "I'll make some mint tea now. You'll warm up from the inside and calm your nerves a bit." "Thank you," the girl mumbled. "Thank you for not leaving me there." "Well, how else could I?" George was surprised. "It happens differently. While I was walking along the highway there, several cars drove towards the city. I waved my hands at them, but no one stopped. It must have been scary. A person on a deserted road, somehow suspicious. Not so much suspicious, but strange, that's for sure," George cautiously remarked. "My name is Vicky." The girl suddenly introduced herself. "And I'm George Miller. Or Uncle George. Whatever's easier for you." "That's what my grandfather was called." The girl smiled faintly, taking the mug of steaming, fragrant drink from George's hands. "He was the only one who wasn't indifferent to me. It's a pity he died early." There was so much grief, so much longing in those words, that George's heart painfully constricted. "I'm sure you're mistaken. You have a mother, a father, don't you? Do you really think you're indifferent even to them?" "Of course," Vicky replied confidently. "They don't have time for me. My father left the family when I was 12. He fell in love, decided to start a new life. And voila, I now have 3 younger sisters. And my mother. I just get in her way. She sometimes meets someone, but she can't bring anyone home. Because I'm there. I'm in everyone's way." With these words, Vicky took off her down jacket, and George couldn't help but let out a surprised gasp. His eyes saw the girl's rounded belly, stretched under a black sweater. His guest was expecting a child, and judging by the size of her belly, The term was significant. Yes, I'm pregnant, Vicky sighed, noticing the host's reaction. What's so strange about that? I'm of age, if that's what you're thinking. Nothing. That's even very good. Children are happiness. It's just that now I don't understand anything. How did you end up on the highway at night and in such a condition? Oh, it's a very long story, the girl sighed. But we're not in a hurry, are we? Will you tell me what happened? Of course, if you'd like. Vicky grew up in a poor family, mother, father, older sister. Her mother worked as a salesperson near their home, her father worked at a factory. Money was only enough for the bare necessities. Inexpensive clothes from the market, simple food, utility payments. There were no funds for travel or for quality cosmetics or a fashionable phone for their daughter. Everyone around them lived like this, but the television showed a completely different reality. And the girl dreamed of one day becoming as rich, successful, and beautiful as the heroines of films and series about the good life. Vicky's sister Hope also strived for success. She studied well, tried to win competitions, dreamed of entering a medical university and becoming a successful, in-demand cardiologist. Subsequently, she managed to achieve this plan, but such a path seemed too long and difficult for Vicky. What was the guarantee that she would succeed? It was possible that all her efforts would be in vain. This scenario did not suit young Vicky. The girl inherited thick chestnut hair and large brown eyes from her father, and a magnificent figure from her mother. The girl rightly considered her advantageous appearance her ticket to life. For a beautiful young girl, Vicky believed, it wasn't that difficult to find a rich man. And then a completely different life would finally begin. The prospects opening up were simply breathtaking. Study harder, the responsible Hope instructed her younger sister. Depend on a man your whole life? What's good about that? That's definitely not for me. But it's quite for me, Vicky smiled in response. And what's not for me is poring over textbooks for hours. I'd rather watch videos on how to apply makeup to highlight my best features. You don't need to highlight anything. You're already a beauty. I know. After the 9th grade, Vicky left the school she hated. To get her mother off her back, the girl pretended to enroll in a culinary college. It had the lowest competition, and it wasn't bad to know how to cook well. After all, everyone knows that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Ultimately, her education at the culinary college played a significant role in Vicky's fate. This happened just before graduation. The girl was doing her internship as a cook's assistant in one of the city's most popular restaurants. Hope had helped her get a place like that. Her older sister had already graduated from university, started working as a doctor in a private clinic, and had acquired good connections. The owner of the restaurant was Julian, a young man from the Armenian diaspora, tall, athletic, well-built, always dressed stylishly and expensively, impeccably polite with the staff, witty, cheerful, and at the same time very handsome. Black eyes, an elegant curve of his lips, a noble arch of his eyebrows. Julian was twice Vicky's age, but that didn't stop her from falling in love with him. Here he was, the man of her dreams. Rich, handsome, successful. With such a man, she could go through fire and water. Nothing was scary. But the observant girl immediately noticed a wedding ring on Julian's finger. Yes, of course, Julian was married. Later, from employees, the girl learned that he was also a father of many children. He was raising 3 daughters. For a long time, Vicky only cast loving glances at her idol. Not all of them went unnoticed. The attentive waitress Olivia noticed the impression Julian made on the young intern. "You're in love, aren't you?" she asked directly one day. Vicky was flustered by the unexpectedness and answered truthfully, "I think so." "No wonder. Julian is handsome, of course, and you, by the way, are quite his type." "What do you mean?" "It's simple. He likes them like that. Thin, young, graceful, and big-eyed." "But Julian is married." "Whoever let that stop them?" Olivia smirked. "Tell me honestly, aren't you afraid of being a mistress? Because he definitely won't leave his wife and children for you." "I'm not afraid," Vicky replied. At that moment, she truly didn't care, as long as she was near Julian. "Well then, I can arrange a date for you. Julian. He himself asked me to talk to you, to sound you out, so to speak. He liked you too." Vicky couldn't believe what she heard. Her head spun. Julian! This prince, this king, her idol. Had he really paid attention to her and even asked Olivia to talk to her? Wow. Of course Vicky gladly agreed to the date. The first meeting took place in a huge country mansion. Everything was mysterious and romantic. Julian sent a car for Vicky. The driver took her out of the city to that very mansion. Luxury. Everything in that place screamed luxury. The girl felt as if she had stepped into a movie about the good life, one of those she loved so much. Julian was waiting for Vicky in a gazebo entwined with flowers and lit by lanterns right next to the pool. Stars shone brightly in the sky, and he looked at Vicky with admiration, with interest, and smiled. All of this made the girl's head spin. Was what was happening real? Or was it a dream or fantasy? Doubts dissipated when Julian approached her and gallantly took her hand. The warmth of his palm, it was real. That evening, so unusual, romantic, and fairy tale-like, Vicky completely lost her head. Julian turned out to be even more perfect than he seemed from afar. Smart, sensitive, perceptive. In some incredible way, he guessed all of Vicky's desires and fulfilled them almost instantly. And the way Julian looked at her, that gaze made the girl feel wonderful, unique. Next to Julian, Vicky felt like a queen. Julian didn't skimp on gifts. Expensive jewelry, designer cosmetics, elite perfume. The girl's dreams came true. Vicky now bought clothes for herself in boutiques from famous fashion houses. These things, they were strikingly different from everything the girl had worn before. In dresses and jeans from renowned couturiers, Vicky felt luxurious, irresistible, stunning. The admiration in the eyes of others, and most importantly, in Julian's dark eyes, further convinced the girl that she was beautiful. Julian, he was so gentle with her. The authoritative, rich man treated Vicky like a fragile flower or a crystal vase. It was so pleasant to be near him, to breathe in his scent, to feel the warmth of his hands, to hear his low voice with a slight rasp, to see his smile, kind, charming, warm. They usually met in that same mansion. As Vicky understood, it was one of Julian's country houses for recreation. There were many spacious, stylishly furnished rooms, a large gym, a mini cinema, and a pool. Even two pools, one in the yard, the other right in the house. The area around the indoor pool was decorated like a beach. White sand, palm trees, sun loungers. Julian and Vicky often spent time here. While the girl swam in the pool, Julian, lounging on a comfortable sun lounger, watched her. The man told Vicky that he admired her graceful movements and sculpted figure. The girl was pleased to hear this. During these meetings, which happened regularly, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice, there was no one in the house, not even staff. Vicky enjoyed the closeness of her beloved and the surrounding luxury without regard for anyone else. Of course, Vicky perfectly understood that she was just Julian's mistress. The man had emphasized more than once how important his family was to him, and at the same time, he looked at her like that. Her presence made him happy. Vicky knew this for sure. Everything else didn't matter for now. "You must be judging me?" Vicky asked her attentive listener, lowering her gaze. "It just sounds like that. But you see, I knew Julian was married, and I still agreed to this relationship, and with joy." "Not at all, honestly," George replied. "You're just a young girl, and he's an adult, married man, the owner of a large business. He is the one to blame for this, as a man, as the older one. Perhaps you're right, but back then, I didn't blame Julian for anything. On the contrary, I felt sorry for him. After all, I saw that he loved me. At least it seemed that way to me. But I understood that Julian couldn't leave his wife and children. His relatives wouldn't have understood him and wouldn't have supported him. Julian often said how important the opinion of elders and relatives was to them. They would never have forgiven him for such an act. That's why I felt sorry for him. And I loved him very much." One day, Julian told everyone that he was going on a business trip. In reality, however, he decided to arrange a holiday for himself and his young mistress. They went to Thailand. They went from the cold February right into the hot sunny summer. Winter was coming to an end, having become quite tiresome for everyone. Snow, frost, slush. And here, just a few hours by plane, and Vicky and her beloved were in a summer fairy tale. Luxurious beaches, captivating views, warm turquoise water. Vicky and Julian could finally appear together openly everywhere, in restaurants, at discotheques, and simply on the streets of the resort town. They looked magnificent. Vicky knew it. Handsome, manly Julian and she, fragile, happy, tanned. Julian, in front of everyone, hugged the girl around the waist, held her hand, and even kissed her. For the first time, they weren't hiding. These were indescribable feelings. Vicky had never felt so happy. In Julian's strong, reliable embrace, she forgot everything. Even the fact that her beloved man was married, that they would soon return home, where Vicky would again have to settle for rare meetings and feel like just a mistress. Deep down, the girl harbored a hope that Julian would sooner or later leave his wife for her. It sometimes happens. Why couldn't this miracle happen to them? Only something had to happen that would help Julian decide on a desperate step. There, in Thailand, the man confided in Vicky one day. They were returning from the beach. It was already late at night. Julian and Vicky loved swimming in the dark when there were few people on the beaches, and so they often returned to the hotel after midnight. And now they were walking along the water's edge. Water dripped from Vicky's long wavy hair. She hadn't had time to dry it with a towel. To be precise, she simply didn't. Julian had once confessed that he loved watching her wet hair. That way, Vicky reminded him of a beautiful mermaid. So the girl tried for him. The moon shone brightly from the sky. It was somehow unusual here. Too large, naturally yellow, as if painted. A fantastic sight. Muffled music drifted from somewhere near the pier. Probably a disco had started at the bar. "What are you dreaming about?" Julian asked his companion thoughtfully. Vicky pondered. Should she tell the truth? Confess that she only dreamed of falling asleep and waking up in Julian's arms, making him breakfast, seeing him off to work, ironing his shirts? Wouldn't that sound too tedious? What if Julian considered her clingy? No, Vicky couldn't let that happen. I dream of traveling a lot. Traveling around Europe, visiting some exotic countries, seeing with my own eyes things I've only heard about before. A wonderful wish, Julian approved. I'll help you fulfill it. I myself really like the idea. And you? What do you dream about? Vicky asked in return. The answer stunned the girl. I dream of a son, Julian confessed. More than anything in the world, I want to have a son. But my wife and I only have daughters. I adore them. My daughters are my life. I'm proud of them. I love them. But I continue to dream of an heir. I never would have thought that. Why? Julian smiled. I thought you dreamed of opening a new chain of restaurants, starting some new business, building an empire. Oh yes, many people think so. No one imagines that more than anything in the world I dream of a son, a continuation of my lineage. I've already thought of a name for him. Sometimes I look at toys in the boys' sections, and then I go to the pink shelves with dolls to please my daughters. You sound like a wonderful father, Vicky sighed and thought of her own father. He never bought dolls for her or her sister. What about dolls? Her indifferent father couldn't even say for sure what grade his daughter was in or when their birthdays were. Vicky thought a lot about that conversation on the shore afterwards, and gradually a decision formed in her mind. A bold one, perhaps even reckless. She would fulfill the dream of her beloved man. She would bear him a son, as handsome and smart as Julian himself. At first, the girl herself was frightened by her thoughts. Julian had told her directly that he wasn't going to leave his wife and children. Would he be happy about the news of a child on the side? This was very serious after all. But one day Vicky saw how tenderly Julian treated a little boy, the child of visitors to his restaurant. The little one looked about 3 or 4 years old. He was being capricious, sitting in his high chair. He was probably bored like any child. The boy wanted to run, have fun, make noise. Julian, who had dropped into the restaurant for a minute, noticed the scene. He approached the child, shook his hand like an adult, started some conversation with him, and the little one immediately calmed down, as if he had grown up right before his eyes. You are happy parents, he said to the visitors. You have a wonderful son growing up, a real man. Oh yes, The boy's mother smiled skeptically. Her whole appearance suggested that she certainly didn't consider herself a happy parent. But Vicky, who had already finished her internship and was working as a waitress in the restaurant, she had managed to notice everything. Julian's tender gaze at the child, his warm smile. It seemed he really did dream of a son very much. This episode helped Vicky decide. She realized it was time to move from planning to action. The girl simply stopped taking her pills. And she also scoured the internet looking for a way to conceive specifically a boy. These methods seemed somehow too unreliable. Vicky needed guarantees, so she turned to Hope, her older sister who had graduated from medical academy and certainly understood such matters. "Your interests are strange," Hope said, surprised, when she heard her sister's question. "Nothing strange. We have a waitress at work. Her name is Olivia. She and her husband are planning their second child. Their older one is a daughter. Now they want a son. Is it possible to arrange that somehow?" "Well, there is one option," Hope replied. "True, it's not particularly reliable, but it increases the chances of conceiving a child of the desired sex. Although, I repeat, it's a very complex process, and by the way, a lot depends on the man's physiology here. But go ahead, I'll write down a calculation scheme for the necessary days for your Olivia. Let them try with her husband, you never know." And Vicky, of course, used this scheme. Everything worked out immediately, on the very first try. 2 weeks after the romantic evening, Vicky realized she was expecting a child. The discovery both pleased and frightened her, but there was no turning back. The girl didn't tell Julian anything. She wanted to find out the baby's sex herself first, and then make it a surprise for him. Circumstances also aligned very well. The man had flown to Armenia with his family for several months. Vicky missed her beloved and at the same time enjoyed her new condition. It was amazing to realize that a child was living inside her. Not just a child, their baby, hers and Julian's. They would have a son. Vicky had almost no doubt that she was carrying a boy. She felt it. Vicky didn't tell her relatives about her pregnancy, and no one was interested anyway. Her mother lived her own life. Her father had completely disappeared from the horizon. Hope had been renting an apartment for a long time, closer to work. The sisters didn't communicate much during that period. At the appointed time, Vicky went for an ultrasound. She waited with bated breath for the specialist's verdict. "You're having a boy," said the strict woman in glasses, who was moving the sensor over Vicky's belly, which was just beginning to round out. "A healthy, strong boy. Congratulations." Vicky flew home on wings that day. That very day, Hope came to visit and immediately understood everything. Her sister always had a sharp eye. "Are you pregnant?" she asked quietly when their mother went into the kitchen. "Yes," Vicky nodded, not even trying to hide her smile. "I'll have a son soon." "Who is his father?" "The best man in the world." "And where is he? Why aren't you with him yet? How are you going to raise the child?" "Dad," Vicky said dreamily, "he's just not in the country right now, and it's not really appropriate to deliver such news over the phone. I'll wait for him to come back and everything will be decided. Just don't tell Mom yet or she'll drive me crazy." "As you wish," Hope shrugged. "If you need help, let me know. I can't promise much, but I'll help as I can. Thank you so much." Her mother still managed to wear out the nerves of her pregnant daughter. When her belly was no longer concealable, she noticed everything and understood. How her mother screamed at Vicky then, called her the worst names, threatened her with a hard fate. Then she softened a little, started trying to get information about the baby's father. Vicky told her mother the truth, but she didn't believe a single word her daughter said. She decided that Vicky had gotten pregnant by some good-for-nothing and was now making up stories to justify herself. Now her mother often sighed about her difficult fate, complaining that her ungrateful daughter would soon burden her with a freeloader. The girl clenched her teeth to avoid useless arguments with her parent and waited for her beloved's return. The day Julian flew back from Armenia was snowy and cold. January was ending, a long February lay ahead. And after that, in March, in the first spring days, a wonderful baby would be born, a son so long awaited for Julian. Julian himself called Vicky, said he missed her very much, and dreamed of meeting. As usual, he sent a car for her, which brought Vicky to the now familiar country house. The man himself opened the door. He was smiling, warmly and very kindly. Vicky simply adored his smile. But very soon, that self-charming smile slid off the man's face. Julian saw Vicky's belly, which could no longer be hidden. Is that what I think it is?" he asked with something akin to disgust. "Julian, I didn't want to tell you over the phone. I dreamed of telling you in person. We're going to have a son soon. A son, Julian, can you imagine? Your dream will finally come true." The man sank wearily into an armchair. He seemed to have aged in an instant. From him, it was as if icy cold radiated from him. This was so unusual that Vicky was flustered and frightened. The girl, of course, understood that Julian would be very surprised, but he looked as if he had just learned about some annoying problem. And what about his talk of a son? Julian had dreamed of him so much. "Aren't you happy?" Vicky finally dared to ask. Julian raised his eyes to her. They looked somehow very tired or something. "Go home," the man said calmly. "Go. I need to think things over. I'll tell you later what to do." Julian himself called a taxi. Vicky held it together in the house. But in the car, she gave way to tears. A loving person wouldn't act the way Julian did. They hadn't seen each other for several months, and he had sent her away, practically kicked her out. Julian didn't love her. Before, Vicky had felt like a beautiful princess next to this man. Now, Julian had treated her like some unwanted thing. There wasn't a drop of love or joy in his eyes, only irritation and anger. How could this be? Had he been pretending all this time? Had he just been using her beauty and youth? Vicky didn't want to go home. Her mother was there with her complaints. By the way, in the end, her parent turned out to be right. It seemed Vicky would indeed have to raise the baby alone. The child, thoughts of him brought Vicky back to her senses. Soon she would have a son, a dear, beloved person. He needed a strong, sensible mother, and that meant Vicky would be one. Thinking of her boy, the girl smiled through her tears. Life no longer seemed bleak. So what if Julian wouldn't be by her side? But Vicky would be a mother very soon. Even the anticipation of meeting the little one was happiness. And when she held him in her arms, then she would be able to handle anything. Vicky asked the driver to take her to Hope's place. She could tell Hope everything. Her sister. She was so smart, so kind. Of course, her sister would help her. And Hope did help. She listened, felt sorry for her. Then she went into the living room and pulled out the sofa bed. "This will be your bed," she explained. "Live with me for now. Mom really won't leave you alone, and you can't be nervous now." For a while, Vicky felt safe. She was calm and at ease. Hope supported her sister in every way, buying her vitamins and healthy food. "I want my nephew to be born healthy," the older sister smiled. This made Vicky's heart feel warm. She was pleased that someone else, besides herself, was waiting for the baby and even caring. And then one day, Julian appeared. He didn't send a car for Vicky, he came himself. The girl was just returning from the store. The man was waiting for her in his car near the entrance. "Hello," he opened the driver's door. Julian was smiling again. Only now, Vicky didn't believe that smile. "Hello," the girl greeted him cautiously. "Get in the car, we need to talk." Vicky settled in next to him, still the man she loved. She felt his scent again, saw his black, beautiful eyes up close. That familiar, pleasant chill appeared in her stomach, a usual sensation. "How are you?" the man inquired. "Everything all right? How do you feel? How's the baby?" Was he interested in her condition? Did he actually care? Vicky didn't know how to react. Hope stirred in her soul. Maybe that day the news had just thrown the man off balance. And now he had thought everything over, realized he was wrong, and was ready to make amends. "Everything is fine, both with me and with my son." "That's wonderful. I have a question for you. You don't think you can raise him yourself, alone?" "If that's how it turns out, then I can," Vicky stated confidently. "Oh, come on," Julian smirked. "You don't really have an education and no job either. You'll only be able to go back to work in 3 years. And even then, people aren't exactly eager to hire a mother with a small child. Children get sick, mothers take sick leave. Who needs that?" Vicky still couldn't understand what Julian was getting at, and he continued, "You practically don't have a father. Your mother isn't helpful either. She lives poorly, and your relationship isn't the most trusting. I know all this. All hope is on your sister, but she won't babysit you forever, and it's unfair to dump your problems on a young girl. She needs to build her own life." Vicky was hurt by these words. The most terrible thing was that every single one of them was the pure truth. "Why are you telling me all this?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with approaching tears. "I'm just outlining your situation, to offer you a way out, a real way out." And Julian finally revealed his plan to Vicky, a monstrous and inhumane one. He offered me to give the child to him," the girl said quietly, looking directly into George's eyes. It was clearly hard for Vicky to talk about this. George patted her shoulder encouragingly. Julian said that he had indeed always dreamed of a son. With his wife, he had 3 daughters. It turned out that Julian also had 2 illegitimate daughters. He had already decided that it was something in his blood or genes, and then suddenly, Vicky informed him that she was expecting a son. At first, upon learning of his mistress's pregnancy, the man was angry. These were unnecessary problems that he didn't need at all, but then he thought it over, felt joy in his soul. Finally, he would have a son. Julian had always dreamed of a brilliant future for his heir. He had so many plans for this little one, and if the son were to grow up with a single mother, it was unlikely he would become a worthy man. No, Julian couldn't allow that. "I'll take him from you. I'll take him into my family. I've already talked to my wife. She's now pretending to be pregnant. We'll tell everyone that he's ours, mine and my wife's." "No!" Vicky shook her head in horror and placed her hand on her belly as if protecting the baby. "No, it will be better for everyone this way," Julian continued. "I'll help you with a job, with an apartment. You'll live a free life, find a rich husband. I know how much you dream of that. With a child in your arms, that's unlikely to happen. The boy will grow up in decent conditions. I'll give him everything. You won't be able to provide this child even a small part of what I will give him." Julian's gaze was almost pleading. At that moment, Vicky felt her power over this strong man. Perhaps because of this, she mistakenly thought she could decide something in this strange situation, could make a choice. "No," the girl repeated. She couldn't part with her little one. Vicky had waited for him so much, thought about him so much. She already loved her son, loved him with all her soul, with all her heart. And give him to Julian? No way, never. "Think about it, though," Julian asked finally. "I'll call you again." "There's nothing to think about." "No," Vicky said and got out of the car. She blocked Julian's number then, so as not to get upset and worried for nothing. At home, Vicky told Hope everything. Her sister's face took on a worried expression. "This is bad, very bad," she said. "People like Julian are used to getting their way. You need to be on your guard." Her sister was right. Julian didn't back down. About a week after that conversation in Julian's car, Vicky was almost kidnapped. They tried to drag her into a van with mud-splattered license plates right on the street. The girl was so frightened then. She couldn't resist the strength of the man pulling her towards the open door. A coincidence saved the girl. A police car appeared at the beginning of the street. The failed kidnapper pushed Vicky away, jumped into the van, and sped off. She sat right down in a snowdrift because her legs suddenly weakened and refused to obey their owner. Upon learning what had happened, Hope became seriously worried. "He won't stop," her sister shook her head. Just then, the phone rang. Someone was calling Hope's phone. The girl answered, then handed the receiver to Vicky. "Strange, but it's for you." "Well, hello," Julian's voice sounded in the receiver. Strange, cold, harsh. Was this the man who had called her beautiful, a queen, a miracle just recently? "Please, stop harassing me," Vicky pleaded. "I beg you, leave me alone. I will leave you alone as soon as I get my son. You can be free. A car will come for you today. Be ready by 8 in the evening. A person will take you to a private clinic. You'll give birth there, they'll take the child, and you'll be sent home. With compensation, of course." Vicky couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. Julian turned out to be not a fairy tale prince at all, but an evil, cruel man. Now it seemed there was no escaping him. He had money, connections, his own people throughout the city's infrastructure. How could she oppose him, a man who was used to being able to buy anything? And now he was offering her money for her little one. It was beyond comprehension. It's my own fault. Vicky lowered her eyes. I wanted a beautiful life, and I got myself into this mess. You shouldn't blame yourself. George tried to make his voice sound as gentle as possible. You were just a young, inexperienced girl, and you fell in love with that scoundrel. You were just unlucky. Vicky took a deep breath and continued her story. Hope called me a taxi at 6 in the evening, 2 hours before the time Julian had set. She booked me a room in a hotel in the neighboring town. She said I couldn't give up here if I wanted to protect my child. Hope, as always, had a clear plan. The older sister said that Vicky needed to hold out until she gave birth. There was only a little time left, just over a month. And then it was important to manage to register the baby as her own. When Vicky was officially recognized as the child's mother, Julian wouldn't be able to do anything. Only there were many difficulties in this plan. Firstly, hiding from a person like Julian, even for a few weeks, was problematic. A hotel wasn't such a reliable place. To check in, you needed a passport. Vicky's data would surely show up in some database. But there was no other way out. She couldn't spend the night on the street, and the sisters didn't have any acquaintances willing to shelter Vicky for a few weeks. Secondly, the birth itself. As soon as Vicky went to the maternity hospital, Julian would immediately find out about it. He would surely be monitoring such clinics, as he knew that Vicky would sooner or later have to seek help. But Hope will help me with that, Vicky smiled. She came up with a solution. She has an acquaintance who is a midwife, who will deliver the baby when the time comes. This woman has a whole room set up in her apartment for such events, so Julian won't find out anything. And so the sisters' plan took shape. Vicky would go to the neighboring town and live in a hotel until a certain time. When the time came, Hope would come for her, and they would go together to that midwife. Then Vicky would have to live in the hotel for some more time, because registering the baby's documents wasn't an instantaneous process. Well, and after Vicky had the child's birth certificate in her hands, she could safely return. Only nothing worked out. Vicky shook her head. Hope called me a taxi. The driver took me to the other town. But on the way, it turned out we were being followed. A black SUV with tinted windows was persistently following the taxi. The driver noticed it. He weaved, trying to shake it off, but the car didn't fall behind. And then the man got worried. Did you do something wrong? He asked his passenger. Why are we being followed? No, I didn't do anything wrong, honestly, Vicky replied. I don't like this. I don't need problems. The taxi drove onto the country highway, an empty, snow-covered road. The pursuit continued here too. This won't do, the increasingly nervous taxi driver said. He slammed the gas pedal to the floor and sped forward at high speed. After breaking away from the SUV, the driver braked and opened the door. Get out. The fare is paid. I won't take money from you, although I drove you well. Sort out your problems yourself. But where will I go? Vicky was horrified. A deserted road, frost, darkness, and that terrifying SUV will appear any minute. I have no idea. Wait for that car that's following us. They're looking for you, so they definitely won't leave you on the road. They won't drive past, and I have to go. Having said this, the driver slammed the door and sped away. Almost at the same moment, headlights appeared in the distance. It was probably that same SUV catching up to the taxi. Vicky barely managed to hide behind a large snowdrift. The black, menacing car sped past. The taxi driver's calculation didn't pay off. They continued to follow him, thinking the passenger was still on board. Well, that's basically it, Vicky sighed. I ended up alone on that highway, so I walked back towards the city. I wasn't going to freeze on the roadside, and then you found me. That's how it happened. It's a puzzling story, George said slowly, but what should we do with you now? How can I help you? Vicky shrugged. Here's what, George stated decisively. Right now, you need to rest. Lie down right here in the kitchen near the stove on this sofa. I'll bring you a pillow and blanket now. Really? Vicky's eyes lit up with joy. It was clear that she was very tired and cold. She had been through such stress. The thought of leaving the warm, cozy house made her panic. Of course, really. How else? Tomorrow we'll think about how to help with your trouble. Morning is wiser than evening." "Thank you," the girl exclaimed. "You're welcome," George replied with a smile. "And listen, don't be afraid of anything here. They definitely won't look for you here." Vicky fell asleep instantly, which was understandable. She had been through so much that evening, not everyone could handle it. George carefully closed the kitchen door, put on his quilted jacket, slipped his feet into his felt boots, and went out onto the porch to smoke. Yes, the girl's situation was difficult. He should help. George looked at the bright stars and tried to figure out how to save Vicky. The difficulty was that he couldn't go to the police. It seemed this Julian had everything covered there. Gradually, a quite good plan formed in the man's head. In the morning, George got up early to make breakfast. He himself was used to coffee and a sandwich, but today he had a guest, and a pregnant one at that. She needed a proper meal. So George made scrambled eggs with chicken and tomatoes. Vicky eagerly attacked the breakfast and swallowed everything in an instant. "Thank you, it was incredibly delicious." She sincerely thanked him. "You're doing so much for me." "I thought about your situation yesterday." George began the serious conversation. "And I decided, why go to a hotel where they can find you so easily? Stay with me. They won't look for you here. I'll tell the villagers that you're my niece. They know her, our Susie. She used to visit us often when she was a teenager. And you look very much like her, so no questions will arise. But I can't. I feel awkward putting you out like this." "Now you stop that nonsense," George interrupted the girl. "It's no trouble at all. And helping someone in such a situation is normal, isn't it? So live here as long as you need, and you can stay with the baby here too until you get his documents sorted out." "Thank you." Vicky threw herself around the embarrassed George's neck. "Susie, if anyone asks, your name is Susie," the elderly man reminded her with a smile. "Yes, I'll remember. And can I call Hope from your phone? I'm just afraid my number is being tapped. I'll tell her how I am, she's worried." "Of course." George handed Vicky his mobile phone. And a completely new life began in the small village house. Vicky slept a lot at first. George understood that the young girl's body was coping with stress this way, and he tried not to disturb her unnecessarily. He told the neighbors that his niece Susan had come to stay. She had recently gotten married, was expecting a baby, and her husband was trying to finish renovations before the heir was born. So they sent Susie to her uncle in the village for fresh air, so she wouldn't breathe paint fumes. The story didn't raise any questions or surprise from anyone. Only Peter clearly suspected something, but he kept his suspicions to himself. Vicky spoke little. Sometimes she talked about her life before everything happened. By all accounts, she was, in essence, a child nobody needed. Only Hope, her older sister, and her grandfather George, who died early, cared for her. The girl sometimes called Hope from George's phone. They